Guys, and welcome back to the channel. We have a very exciting video for you today. We are building our perfect 2023 ATP player. Before we get into it though, remember that like button, do subscribe if you're new, and do leave a rating review if you're listening on a podcast platform. So how are we going to go about building our perfect player? Well, in terms of rules, we're going to only take the 2023 season. So how has a player's form looked in 2023? Only standalone. We're not going to take into account previous seasons. On top of that, we will be picking from these categories: serve, return, forehand, backhand, net game, movement, shot tolerance, and mentality. Now, we will only be picking one player, so one player's attributes for each category. I can pick a player more than once. For example, Djokovic was towards the top end of a lot of these categories, and spoiler alert, he's in more than one category in building our perfect player. I am going to add a caveat though and say that I tried not to pick him, and I tried to just look at it from 2023 standalone from each specific shot and picked based on stats and also the eye test, form, etc., etc. Because otherwise, you can easily pick Djokovic all of these because undoubtedly he was the best player of 2023. But we're picking. This is more of a fun exercise to pick each. Take, for example, someone's serve and say, okay, this is the best on tour. This is going to be part of our perfect player for the season, and then return and ultimately try and pick and put together a player that's going to be almost unbeatable. Let me know in the comment section below as well what your perfect player would be. So for serve, I picked the Pole, the Gentle Giant, Hubert Hurkacz, and this is why. He topped quite a few of the serve stats for the season, 79.56%. So let's just round up to 80% of first serve points won. That's the best in the ATP field for the season. He also hit the most aces, 1,031 aces, that is, for 2023, which is, I mean, he was topped by a country mile. The next best was Fritz at 692. So he's hit more than 300 aces than Fritz for the season. I mean, it's not even close. There is an honorable mention, though, to Stefanos Tsitsipas, who topped the service game one stat at 88.64%. Hurkacz was third at 87.99%. Djokovic was sandwiched in between them at second. So that it's a difficult one because I didn't put as much emphasis on that stat because that takes into account, in my opinion anyway, more not just the serve, which is going to be a large part of it, but also how they back it up. And Tsitsipas has a fantastic serve +1, so it's not surprising he topped that stat. But if you take into account the aces and the first serve points won, considering that he was top in both those and then third in the service game one stat, then I think, or service games one stat, then I think it's fair to place him as our number one. So the serve for our perfect player for 2023 goes to Hubert Hurkacz, and I think rightfully so. I would love to have his. So I think a lot of players, or most players on tour, would agree. Return. Now, this is an interesting one because if we were to go with, off the top of your head, you would say, okay, whose return do you want on tour? And this is why this is a fun exercise, because ordinarily you would go, Novak Djokovic. He's got the best return ever, arguably. And I think a lot of people would say that. I think he does have the best return ever. Rafa Nadal's potentially close behind. But for 2023, we have gone for the Russian, the big dog, Daniil Medvedev. Now, why have we gone for him? So second on breakpoints converted at 46.3%. That's only behind Adrian Manarino, by the way, which is probably a big surprise to a lot of you. He had a very good season, the Frenchman. So, you know, he topped the stat at 47.27%. And you could also say that he needs to have a very very solid breakpoints converting stat because his serve is not the best. It's pretty weak. It's a little bit underpowered. So you would expect him to break serve quite a few times to have the type of run results he had this year. Medvedev was also second on return games won at 31.24%, only behind Alcaraz, who topped the stat at 31.81%. Second, also on first serve return points won at 33.75%. Again, he was behind Carlos Alcaraz, who was close to getting this category at 35.41%. And he was also second on second serve points won at 54.15%, behind Yannick Sinner this time, who was at 54.42%. And Daniil Medvedev, we know, is a backboard, the octopus. He is extremely tough to get past. And one thing that this highlights is despite having that extremely deep return position, which especially last year, and you could argue towards the, not even towards, at the start of this year, you'd say the first third of this year, was, it was at times definitely taking advantage of that deep return position. It really was. He struggled a lot last year, for example, against Kyrgios, who would serve and volley a lot against him. Korda at the Australian Open this year, at the start of the year, he really struggled, ended up losing to him. So he's had problems with people serving and volleying against him. And Alcaraz is another example. But what's been really impressive is his ability to put that behind him and then actually make sure that he improves upon his returning. And one thing that I've noticed from him, which has been really impressive, is what he tends to do. He stands very far behind the baseline and he will hit extremely flat, deep returns from positions that are extremely difficult to do so. But for him, it's something that's a lot easier to do than standing on the baseline and taking the ball earlier, or just behind the baseline. So he's standing a good 4 to 6 feet behind the baseline at times on return. And people, of course, will try and take advantage of it by serving out wide and coming into volley. He started to mix up his returns really well, and also his anticipation, I think, for where the serve's going to place has become a lot better. He's utilized, for example, on the juice side, going forehand on the line, and at times he's actually accepted that, okay, I might not be able to hit a really flat return, so I'll go for a loopy return down the line. And if they come forward to the net, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to pass them. I'm still going to pass them if I go loopy down the line with the forehand and into that corner of the court. So he's also going flat cross court as well. We saw him do against, for example, Sinner, although towards the back end of the year he lost him, but he had success against him earlier in the year. Similarly against Alcaraz at the US Open, he avenged the losses that he had to Wimbledon and Indian Wells. So, he had a strong end to the year, but generally speaking, as a whole, his return game is incredibly impressive, and he grinds you down and he really makes you work for your service games, and that's a testament to him and also backed up by the stats. So we've got Hurkacz for serve, Medvedev for return. Now, forehand. This was, in my opinion, a very easy one to pick, and it's actually backed up by stats, and you might be thinking, what stat? We'll get into that in a second. I've gone for the player that won 3 out of the 4 Grand Slams this year, Novak Djokovic, the GOAT, the Serbian legend. I'm not sure how you could go for anyone else. His forehand has been phenomenal this year. It's been so, so good. And I know his backhand is rock solid, and it is arguably the best two-hander. And I don't think the same can be said about his forehand of all time in terms of saying it's the best forehand of all time. But I tell you what, if he continues to hit his forehand as effectively as he did this year, he'll start making a case for it. I'll tell you that. He will start making a case for it because it was phenomenal. Hitting it bigger and harder than ever, miles per hour wise, rushing opponents one with additional attacking penetration through the court to add to his fantastic depth of shot that he already has. He also had an incredible knack of defending extremely well off that wing. His ability to soak up and neutralize depth from opponents was unreal. Specifically, picking up deep shots with the forehand and redirecting them cross court with an angle to drag out the opponent was what impressed me a lot. And it's something he's been doing for a few years, but it's been even more impressive this year, especially doing it whilst, almost doing the splits at times, or having to do it off his right leg. Transitioning from defense to attack seems seamless on that forehand, and it hasn't always been the case. It's extremely demoralizing for an opponent, right? If they throw the kitchen sink at Djokovic and they're still unable to wrestle control the rally. So in my opinion, the forehand just top notch. And to top it off, he had the highest average tennis insight score for forehands at 9.1 for the year for 2023. He was the only player to have a forehand ranked above the 9 mark. And this is out of 10, of course. Alcaraz was next to 8.69, so a pretty sizable gap there. And deservedly, I think it goes to Novak Djokovic. Now, backhand is an interesting one because, again, this could have gone to Novak Djokovic, but I tried to avoid going for him because, as I said, I'm trying not to completely monopolize the categories of Djokovic, because we'll end up building our perfect player and we'll be like, hold on, you look familiar, you look exactly like Novak Djokovic, and that's because you are Novak Djokovic. I've gone for Jannik Sinner, and the reason why is I thought he was deserving of one of these categories. And one thing I will say is, in the last few months of the year, he played some phenomenal tennis, and specifically against Djokovic. His backhand held up beautifully in 2 out of the 3 matches versus Novak in the last few months. And look, I mean, he has great defense, as you say in America, or great defense, as we'd say here in the UK on that side. He's able to hit winners and reliable depth consistently, including fantastic passing shots and lobs. He's second in the Tennis Insight rankings for the year. Djokovic was actually at an 8.3 for the year, Sinner at 8.07, closely followed by Daniel Medvedev, no surprises, at 8.06. So why did I pick Sinner? I think it's backed up by the 2 wins against Djokovic, I think. And he seems to be one of the only players, and you could argue Medvedev or Zverev as well are able to do it. But I think Sinner did it most effectively because he was actually able to win from those positions against Djokovic. And yes, a lot of that was also down to other factors in his game. But I think one of the biggest factors is not being bullied in that ad-court exchange. And that doesn't always necessarily mean backhand to backhand. It could be the into-out forehand, for example, into forehand. But, I think it was a notable thing to mention in this video. And I think Jannik Sinner's backhand has always been extremely good. And I just think it held up beautifully against... Look, I think Djokovic is the ultimate test when it comes to a player's backhand. You could argue Rafa Nadal as well. And I think maybe they're on par because of Rafa's being a lefty. And if you're righty, I think fine. We'd say it's either Novak Djokovic or Rafa Nadal. They're the 2 biggest tests. If you're a right-handed player, your backhand is going to get a real stern test. And if it doesn't hold up well, you've got almost no chance of beating them. So what Sinner did was impressive, given he also had a losing record. Djokovic had never beaten him until that round-robin match in Turin. Managed to beat him, lost the final convincingly. Djokovic played incredibly well there, by the way. We'll mention that a bit later. But Sinner, Davis Cup, managed to save 3 match points, beat Djokovic, and avenge that loss in the ATP finals, went on to win the Davis Cup. Look, I mean, I think I'm happy to give him our backhand. So far we've gone Serve catch, Medvedev return, Djokovic forehand, Sinner backhand. Not too shabby. Now, net game, I've gone a little bit different here. I've gone a little bit different. I haven't gone for the player who had the most net points won in 2023 because I've tried to almost stick to players who have played against the top of the competition regularly throughout the year. I could have gone for someone outside the top 50, top 100, top 200, but I tried to avoid doing that. I've gone for Grigor Dimitrov, and the Bulgarian had a fantastic year in 2023 and a rejuvenated year for him. He is due a big year now, I think, 2024 in slams. Let's see what happens. But in terms of his net game, people, I think, underestimate how good he is in the net. He won 72.2% of his net points in 2023, which is, incredibly impressive. And he topped the stat for top 20 players. There were players, as I said, with a better win percentage, but I went with Dimitrov as he's played a full year against top players consistently. The Bulgarian has great touch and flexibility in the net. He's extremely quick and has arguably one of the best, I would say, feet, and is one of the best movers on tour as well. A lot of people tend to say that, players anyway, not even necessarily pundits. On his net game this year was very, very good, and something that he should continue to hone, I think, going into 2024, especially as he's getting older. So it's a reliable way of shortening points given how good his transition game is. Movement. Now, movement is an interesting one because there's so many players that could have got this. We've just talked about Dimitrov. There's Djokovic as well. Sinner's a great mover. Medvedev's a fantastic mover. I went a different way. I went Carlos Alcaraz, and this is it's a difficult one because there's not really any stats to back this one up. This is more on the eye test, and if we were talking about 10 years ago, then you'd give it to Nadal or Djokovic almost every year for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years anyway, because they're so good in terms of movement, and they still are. But I think Alcaraz, being the young gun, being the young buck, and given also how well he moved on grass, and I think actually that Wimbledon win really tipped it for me that he should get it, because with his complete lack of experience on grass, the way he moved on it was phenomenal. The way Alcaraz moves is a blend of Nadal and Djokovic, in my opinion. He defends and moves with speed and tenacity like Nadal, but has developed a level of flexibility akin to Novak. He's probably not as flexible as Novak, but he's not far off. He moves lightning quick laterally and up into the net as well to chase down drop shots. And his transition game was fantastic throughout the year as well, which pairs up nicely with his net game, right? Because his transition game, to me, is one of the best on tour. And he's got good hands in the net. We're talking about Dimitrov in terms of net game. Alcaraz is, he's got very, very good net game. His hands are good. He's got good touch. And it seems to be very, very natural to him, in all honesty, which is positive. Someone I also didn't mention, which I should have in terms of honorable mentions, was Holger Rune, who also has fantastic hands in the net, transition game, and defends extremely well. So honorable mention to him as well. But yeah, for Alcaraz, the highlight real shots you see of him hitting incredible lobs, passing shots, and winners from crazy positions is because of his great foot movement, speed, and positioning. It's also imperative for him to successfully execute his drop shot. If you don't have fantastic movement, it's very hard to be able to execute an effective drop shot. I know he's got incredible hands and touch, and he can probably play it from angles and positions that not all players can, but to have the type of effectiveness that he has on his drop shot only comes with fantastic movement. So last two categories, then we've got Alcaraz movement. Shot tolerance, I've gone pretty different here. I've gone for Alex de Minaur, the Australian, the speed demon. And I'll tell you why. Wow, there's some interesting stats here to get through. Let's just say that. 21, let's just say 22% of points won by him were due to an unforced error by opponents. 55 points won by him were forced errors by opponents. So that means that Alex de Minaur was winning 77% of his points due to opponent errors, either forced or unforced. That, to me, indicates a very, very high level of shot tolerance from de Minaur. A level of not missing much, and yes, unforced errors, you could say, well, okay, unforced errors could just be an opponent spraying the ball. Unforced errors tend to also come about because a player gets frustrated and tries to go for more. Force errors are where it's very clear that the opponent, i.e. Alex de Minaur in this case, has hit an extremely high quality shot that has the player in a defensive position struggling to make the shot, for example. So 77% of points won were opponent errors. To me, just is astounding, to say the least. And the Australian has great speed and defensive capabilities. His shot tolerance is fantastic, highlighted by his 7-0 head-to-head versus Andy Murray, a player who's built a career on inducing errors from opponents. So I think that says it all. So I'm happy to give it to Alex de Minaur. And of course, you would also think about a Djokovic, but I think Djokovic has evolved his game. He's not just a wall anymore like he was back in the day. He's now more of a hybrid, I'd say, in between. He's able to tap into that, but also has the offensive capabilities, which is fantastic. But yeah, it would have been more like Alex de Minaur. I think honorable mentions to someone like a Daniel Medvedev, for example. He would have been up there as well. And then mentality to top it off. So we've gone for our shots in terms of serve, her catch, Medvedev return, Djokovic forehand, Sinner backhand, Dimitrov net game, Alcaraz movement, Alex de Minaur in terms of shot tolerance, and then the last category of mentality we've gone for, you guessed it, Novak Djokovic. 80% of tiebreaks won, or 79.49% of tiebreaks won for the year. Also racked up a 9.75 Tennis Insights ranking or rating even for performance versus Sinner in the final of the ATP finals, which was, in my opinion, phenomenal given he lost in the round robin match. To then pull out the performance, to me, just highlights what a mental giant he is. 3 Grand Slam ones. Is that enough said? I mean, potentially, given that the 3 slams he won were clean sweeps and then pushed Alcaraz very hard in that Wimbledon final, very close to winning it as well. Djokovic, I think, is just, in my opinion anyway, light years ahead of everyone else on tour when it comes to mentality. And so he would give our perfect player the best chance of maximizing their potential from a mental aspect and also a physical aspect, to be fair as well. Looks after himself very well. But let's just say, let's keep it to the mental. So that's our perfect player for the ATP season of 2023. Let me know in the comment section below who you would have picked for each category and why. Thank you very much, guys. Stay safe and well, and we'll see you in the next video.